A new lobby group has been established working on behalf of Japanese companies building vehicles in southern Ontario. Toyota and Honda have combined to form the Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada. The two companies accounted for about 3/4 of vehicles produced in Canada last year.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford is denying claims made by a Japanese media outlet that Honda is considering moving production out of Canada.
Toyota and Honda are not leaving Canada. In fact, they're doing the exact opposite, locking in their position and coordinating from inside the country. This comes at a moment when Donald Trump's 25% auto tariffs were supposed to force production back into the United States. That was the plan: pressure Canada, disrupt supply chains, and pull the industry south. But instead of relocating, two of the biggest global automakers have chosen to stay, and more importantly, to anchor their strategy in Canada. That shift tells you everything. Because this is no longer just about tariffs or trade policy. It's about where companies choose to operate when the system becomes unstable. And right now, they're choosing Canada. As of 2026, the North American auto industry is under sustained pressure from U.S. trade policy. President Donald Trump, now in his second term, has imposed and threatened sweeping tariffs on vehicles and components from Canada and Mexico, aiming to accelerate reshoring. The impact has been immediate, but not in the way policymakers anticipated. Honda, which operates a major facility in Alliston, Ontario, employing around 4,200 workers, has confirmed that production will continue at full capacity. Toyota has taken the same stance across its Canadian plants, maintaining operations despite mounting cost pressures. At the same time, both companies have taken a coordinated step forward. They have joined forces to create the Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada, a joint industry platform representing roughly 75% of Canada's total vehicle production. This is not a retreat under pressure. It is a repositioning under stress. North America's auto sector was never designed to operate within rigid national boundaries. It evolved as a fully integrated system where parts, components, and finished vehicles move fluidly across borders. That system is now under strain. Tariffs introduced by the United States are not just increasing costs, they are disrupting the logic of integration itself. A single vehicle assembled in Canada may include parts from multiple U.S. states and Mexican suppliers. When each border crossing carries added cost, the entire model becomes less efficient. The numbers are already reflecting that strain. Tariffs have added tens of billions of dollars in new costs across the global automotive sector. Vehicle prices across North America have climbed, in some cases by several $1,000s per unit. Even domestic U.S. production is facing higher input costs due to tariffs on steel and aluminum. This is not a targeted adjustment. It is systemic pressure. But cost is only part of the story. The deeper issue is uncertainty. Policy direction in Washington has become increasingly difficult to predict. Tariffs are introduced, revised, delayed, and sometimes contradicted within short timeframes. Trade rules tied to USMCA are under review, reinterpretation, or political negotiation. For an industry that plans investments over 5 to 10 years, this is a fundamental problem. Executives are not just asking how much tariffs will cost, they are asking whether the rules will remain stable long enough to justify any major decision. And right now, the answer is unclear. This uncertainty has effectively frozen large segments of the industry. Expansion plans are delayed. New investments are reconsidered. Strategic decisions are postponed. In a sector that depends on long-term certainty, short-term volatility becomes a structural risk. This is where Toyota and Honda's strategy becomes clear. They are not trying to outmaneuver the system. They are trying to stabilize within it. Canada offers something increasingly rare in the current environment: predictability. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, the Canadian approach has been consistent. There have been no abrupt policy reversals, no sudden tariff escalations, and no attempts to weaponize trade policy in unpredictable ways. Instead, Canada has maintained a steady, rules-based framework that allows companies to plan with a degree of confidence. That stability is not theoretical. It translates directly into operational decisions. When faced with a choice between a volatile policy environment and a stable one, companies will often choose the latter, even if costs are not dramatically lower, because in the long run, unpredictability is more expensive than any tariff. That is why Toyota and Honda are not leaving. They are anchoring. Another signal of this shift is how companies are behaving toward each other. Toyota and Honda are direct competitors in the global market, yet in Canada, they have chosen to collaborate. The formation of a joint industry group is not just about advocacy, it is about coordination in an uncertain environment. When the system itself becomes unstable, competition becomes secondary. The priority shifts to preserving the conditions that allow the industry to function. By aligning their efforts, these companies are building a collective position within Canada. They are preparing not only to manage current tariff pressures, but to influence future trade negotiations, particularly the upcoming USMCA review. This is a long-term move, and it is rooted in the assumption that Canada will remain a viable base. Canada's role in this story is not defined by aggressive action. It is defined by restraint. While the United States is actively reshaping trade policy through tariffs and negotiation pressure, Canada has taken a more measured approach. It has avoided dramatic policy swings and focused instead on maintaining a stable environment for investment. That approach may not generate headlines, but it generates confidence, and confidence is what drives capital allocation. Canada does not need to outbid the United States. It does not need to outmaneuver it politically. It simply needs to remain consistent while others introduce volatility. That is its advantage. What we are seeing now is not a full realignment of the North American auto industry, but it is the beginning of a shift. Companies are no longer optimizing purely for cost. They are optimizing for resilience. That means diversifying production, balancing risk across regions, and anchoring operations in locations where policy is stable. Canada fits that profile. Toyota and Honda's decision to remain and coordinate in Canada is a reflection of this broader shift. It is not a rejection of the United States. It is a recalibration of risk. And in that recalibration, Canada becomes more than a participant. It becomes a reference point. Beyond autos, this shift is already visible in adjacent sectors. Canada's exports of critical minerals, aluminum, and energy inputs, key components in vehicle production, have become even more strategically important as supply chains fragment. The country supplies a significant share of U.S. aluminum and remains a top provider of energy imports, reinforcing its role not just as a manufacturing base, but as a foundational supplier. As companies rethink supply chain security, Canada's combination of resource depth and policy stability is turning it into a long-term anchor, not just for vehicles, but for the entire industrial ecosystem that supports them. Donald Trump's tariff strategy was intended to bring clarity to the system, build in America or pay the price. But instead, it has introduced a different kind of reality. Costs have risen, uncertainty has increased, and the system that once operated seamlessly across North America is now under visible strain. In that environment, companies are not rushing to relocate. They are looking for stability. Toyota and Honda have made their choice. They are not chasing short-term incentives or reacting to political pressure. They are anchoring their operations in a place where the rules are still clear. And right now, that place is Canada. The question going forward is not whether tariffs will continue to reshape the industry. It's whether stability will ultimately matter more than power. Because if it does, Canada may not just be holding the line. It may be defining the next phase of North American manufacturing.
Japanese automakers have picked up the slack. They now build the majority of the cars in Canada, about 77%.
Toyota and Honda, through thick and thin over the last 40 years, have never retreated from Canada.
Japan just delivered the clearest signal yet in the auto industry. The real stability in North America now sits in Canada, not in Donald Trump's United States. While U.S. automakers retreat and tariffs keep detonating across the border, Toyota and Honda are taking over Canadian auto production, expanding their footprint and demonstrating what every global CEO now understands. Canada is the reliable partner. The United States is the risk. And Japan isn't alone. South Korea has already signed a sweeping mobility contract with Ottawa, opening a new era of EV, battery, and automotive cooperation. The industrial center of gravity is shifting, and it's shifting away from the United States.
But how did Japan overtake Detroit so completely inside Canada's own auto sector? Canada's auto output has weakened over the past decade, but not because of domestic failure. The slide began when Ford, GM, and Stellantis aggressively reduced Canadian production to shield themselves from tariff cycles, regulatory whiplash, and policy uncertainty coming from Washington. A decade ago, the Detroit Three built 56% of all vehicles in Canada. By last year, that number collapsed to 23%. Yet the story didn't end in decline, it pivoted. While the U.S. automakers pulled back, Japanese automakers surged forward, now producing approximately 77% of all vehicles built in Canada. They maintained long-term commitments, expanded capacity, and avoided the volatility that has become standard operating procedure in Trump's America. And now South Korea has stepped in as well, deepening coordination with Ottawa through a new mobility and clean tech partnership. Canada is becoming the predictable, rules-based hub for global automakers who want access to the North American market without being exposed to the U.S. political storm.
Revamping Canadian operations to make electric vehicles, the U.S. removed supports for EVs, then added steep tariffs, forcing the companies to shutter plants and lay off workers.
Let's focus on those companies, and they've shown their commitment to Canada.
At the operational level, the shift is rooted in the fundamentals. Canada's auto clusters benefit from stable, clean power, deep parts networks, and workforce continuity. Toyota's Cambridge facility and Honda's Alliston plant remain among the most efficient in the continent, producing high-volume models with consistent quality. The Japanese manufacturing philosophy thrives on predictability, and Canada provides exactly that. Detroit-based manufacturers, meanwhile, faced repeated disruptions because each tariff threat from Washington scrambled cost structures and delayed shipments. Systems engineered for just-in-time logistics were suddenly exposed to policy volatility instead of market conditions. Canada became the environment where long-term technical planning could survive. Ottawa's regulatory environment stands in sharp contrast to Washington's unpredictability. Mark Carney's government has spent its first year tightening investment incentives, accelerating clean power credits, and offering targeted support only to companies that build real domestic capacity. Trump's approach could not be more different. EV incentives cut, reinstated, then rewritten. Section 232 tariffs expanded with almost no notice. USMCA renegotiation threats hanging permanently over the sector. This created a legal climate where long-term planning in the U.S. became a gamble rather than a strategy. For global automakers, the choice is simple. Build where the rules won't change overnight. And the early signs show that Carney's stability-first model is calming the waters investors refused to navigate during the last 4 years. The economic reshaping of North America's auto chain is enormous. Canada's auto sector contributes roughly $16.8 billion USD in GDP, supporting about 125,000 manufacturing jobs and over 460,000 indirect jobs. Japanese automakers now anchor that ecosystem, contributing nearly $25 billion USD a year in economic activity. On the other side of the ledger, U.S. automakers shrinking their footprint created real financial harm. Stellantis' exit from Brampton wiped out around 3,000 jobs, a loss amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars in annual wages. GM's reductions in Ingersoll removed 500 direct jobs and an estimated 1,200 related positions, carving another 150 to 200 million USD in income out of Ontario's economy. But here is the strategic twist. Every dollar the Detroit Three pulled out is being replaced, and in some areas exceeded, by Japan, Korea, and European investment. Volkswagen's $7 billion battery plant, Toyota increasing output, Honda preparing for EV transitions, Korea positioning itself inside Canada's supply chain rather than America's. This is no longer a patchwork response. It is the emergence of a new North American industrial model built around Canada, not the U.S.
This shift is not just about factories. It marks a realignment in how allies view North American stability. When the United States treats supply chains as bargaining chips, global partners hedge their bets. Japan is quietly hedging toward Canada. Korea is doing the same. This is a geopolitical repositioning driven not by ideology, but by economic pragmatism. Canada, with its critical minerals, clean energy grid, and steady diplomatic posture, has become the non-volatile entry point to the North American market. Trump's tariff-first approach has pushed Asian and European manufacturers to seek alternatives, and Canada is increasingly the preferred choice. These decisions matter. They reshape alliances not with speeches, but with factories, minerals, and multi-billion-dollar production lines. For Mark Carney, this reshaping of the auto landscape is not an accident. It is the direct result of a strategy he articulated from day one: diversify, de-risk, and rebuild industrial strength. His government came into office under pressure after GM and Stellantis pulled back from Ontario. But instead of trying to appease Detroit, Carney doubled down on diversification, pursuing Asian partnerships, accelerating Canada's clean power transformation, and offering targeted incentives only to firms that expand domestic production. Trump unintentionally helped. His tariff cycles created the very uncertainty that pushed multinational automakers toward Canada's side of the border. And Carney's message resonates: Canada will not be a hostage to U.S. industrial volatility. This is also political ammunition. When Canadian jobs come from Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, and Volkswagen, not GM and Ford, it undermines decades of U.S. leverage in North American auto negotiations. North America is now dividing into two auto models. The U.S. model is built on tariffs, reshoring slogans, and short political cycles. Production rises or falls depending on the president's mood. The Canadian model is built on stable regulation, clean power, critical mineral availability, and deepening ties with Japan and Korea. If the current trend continues, Canada could emerge as the EV and advanced mobility hub of North America by 2030, capturing the global manufacturers who want U.S. market access without U.S. instability. The momentum is no longer theoretical. It is already visible in investment flows, production shifts, and new supply chain mapping. The open question now is whether Europe, India, or even Southeast Asia follow the same path and place their long-term bets in Canada.
The old story no longer applies. Canada is no longer the junior partner in North America's auto game. Japan increasing production in Canada is not a coincidence. It is a referendum on where stability, talent, and predictability now live on this continent. Korea's alignment reinforces the same message. And U.S. automakers retreating has unintentionally accelerated Canada's transition from secondary player to emerging hub. This is the new reality. Canada is becoming the anchor of North's auto future, not because America failed, but because Canada adapted. And the question for Washington is now unavoidable. If global automakers are choosing Canada over the United States, how much longer can America pretend it still sets the rules of this industry?